Hello everyone, have a nice evening. Enjoy the good ghost story with the sound of light rain from BLACKRIDGE Stories, and sleep well. Welcome to the dark and tense story part 1. The house of the ghosts deep in the Alaskan forest, where frost reigns and darkness never truly lifts. A group of young travelers stumbled upon a house forgotten by time, and the spirits that remained inside it. They hadn't set out looking for anything mysterious. It was just a late winter trek, the kind they were used to: barren trees, half-melted snow, and air so cold it cut the skin. The group of 5, Josh, Natalie, Eric, Dana, and Marcus, were no strangers to wild adventures. But this time, the Alaskan Trail led them to something not marked on any map. It was a 2-story wooden cabin, its slanted roof overtaken by green moss and creeping vines. Trees had encroached onto the cracked stone foundation. It looked as if it had stood for centuries, slowly consumed by the forest, and yet still standing. "Not on the GPS," Josh muttered, twisting his phone in his hand, no signal showing. "Probably an old hunting lodge. Let's take a quick look and move on," Natalie suggested. Before anyone could object, she pushed open the rotting wooden door. Inside, it was pitch dark, but broken window panes allowed enough light to illuminate the dust-covered interior. A dining table, rocking chairs, a stone fireplace, and a large portrait hanging on the wall. A stern-faced man with a thick beard dressed in 19th century clothes. "Looks like a settler's home from way back," Eric noted, pulling out his phone to take a picture. Oddly, his camera wouldn't capture anything but black. The screen stayed murky, though the room was clearly lit. Marcus found an old notebook buried under a thick layer of dust. The leather cover was flaking off, but the handwriting inside was still legible. "November 1887. We can no longer leave. The forest will not allow it." Dana snorted. Classic haunted house scare tactic, trying to spook visitors. But then the noises began, faint at first. A soft creak from upstairs. The groan of old wood, as if someone were walking slowly across the rotting floor. They froze, eyes turning to the spiral staircase. No one was there. "Probably the wind," Josh mumbled, though he didn't sound convinced. As they decided to check the upper floor, the air grew heavier. Each step echoed like a footprint on memory. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, revealing a bedroom so thick with dust it looked frozen in time. On the dressing table lay a silver hairbrush, with a few tangled curls still caught in it. "Look at this," Natalie whispered. She held up a handwritten letter, the script shaky and uneven. "They come every night. They stand at the foot of the bed. They don't want me to leave." Eric joked. "Sounds like the plot of a ghost romance movie." No one laughed. That night, as they set up camp near the house, Dana was the first to hear the whispering. It came from the woods, but pressed into her ear like it was spoken inches away. "Stay with us." She woke in a panic to see the silhouette of a woman in a white dress standing at the tree line, unmoving, unblinking. When she blinked again, the figure was gone. The next morning, Dana said nothing, but Natalie found footprints around their tents, small, bare prints, like those of a child, pressed clearly into the snow. None of them had walked barefoot. None of them had feet that small. "We need to leave," Natalie said, shaken for the first time. But Marcus refused. He had become obsessed with the old journals he had found in the house. Entries chronicling night after night of living with something unseen. The more he read, the more he changed. His eyes grew vacant, his voice flat, as though he was speaking from somewhere far away. By nightfall, he wouldn't eat or speak. He just sat in the old upstairs room, staring out the window as if expecting someone. "Something's wrong with Marcus," Josh said, worried. "We need to drag him out now." But it was too late. When they entered the room again, Marcus was gone. No sign of exit, no sound of footsteps. Only one handwritten line remained, in Marcus's own handwriting. "I chose to stay. They want their story told." Josh, Natalie, Eric, and Dana fled, leaving the house behind like escaping a nightmare. But the whispers followed them, through every branch, every drifting mist. And when they looked back, the house was gone. Welcome to the dark and tense story part 2. Light of the Soul. Deep in the snowbound heart of Alaska, where the nights are long and the silence even longer, a solitary man begins to suspect that the northern lights above him are more than just a natural wonder. They're alive, watching, and whispering. Eli Martin had lived alone in the outskirts of Nome for nearly 5 years. After his wife passed away, he had retreated from the noise of the world, trading crowded streets and office clocks for the creaking woods and the long hum of winter wind. His cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, silent and untouched, just like he liked it. But one winter evening, something changed. It began as it always did. Eli sitting on his porch with a mug of steaming coffee, wrapped in layers of wool, staring up at the sky. The aurora borealis danced above, a mesmerizing river of green, blue, and violet. But that night, the lights pulsed differently. The usual slow, swirling curtains were replaced with sharp streaks, rapid flashes, almost rhythmic, almost intentional. He blinked. The lights blinked back. Eli chuckled at himself and sipped his coffee, dismissing the moment. But the feeling didn't go away, the sensation of being watched, as though the lights had narrowed their focus on him and him alone. The next night, it happened again. This time, the lights swirled in patterns, tight spirals, sharp lines, as if drawing something in the sky. Shapes formed and vanished before he could fully grasp them. It wasn't just beautiful anymore. It was coded. He took out his camera and tried to record the display, but the footage was always blank. Nothing but static or darkness. Yet his eyes swore by what they had seen. Hands, outlines of faces, and mouths moving as if whispering words he could almost hear. By the third night, Eli stopped sleeping. Instead, he stared at the sky for hours, sketching what he saw. His notebook, once full of fish counts and weather observations, was now covered in swirling lines, symbols he didn't understand. One in particular repeated itself, a circle with jagged rays, like a sun drawn by a child, but with a hollow center, like an eye. One morning, when he ventured into town for supplies, he showed the sketch to an elder named Ruth, one of the few who had been born and raised on this land. She looked at the symbol and paled. "You saw this?" she asked. Eli nodded. "In the lights." Ruth's voice dropped. "That's the mark of the Taktuk, the silent ones, the old spirits. They are not evil, but they are not at rest. They speak in the lights, but only when they've been trapped between this world and the next." Eli stared at her. "You're saying the lights are haunted?" Ruth didn't answer right away. Instead, she touched the symbol. They want something. When they start showing themselves, it means they've chosen someone to listen. Eli left the store with a bundle of dried herbs she gave him. "For protection," she said. He wasn't sure what he believed anymore. That night, the lights returned in full force. Brilliant waves of emerald and crimson flooded the sky, more vibrant than he'd ever seen. And then came the whispers. Not imagined, not faint, clear. Eli, he froze. "Help." He looked around, heart pounding. The voice, soft and layered, didn't come from the woods, but from above, from the sky. The lights shifted again. Faces formed, clearer now. Dozens of them, some old, some young, all with hollow eyes. One face lingered longer than the others. A young girl, maybe 8 or 9. Her mouth moved slowly. "Find us." The temperature dropped suddenly. Frost crawled across his window from the inside. His breath fogged in his living room, though the fire still burned. Eli didn't sleep that night. Instead, he studied his sketches, trying to piece together what the lights were telling him. It was no longer art, it was a map. The symbols repeated in a pattern, and when he overlaid the designs with a map of the region, one spot stood out. An old mining site, abandoned for decades, nestled in the mountains northeast of his cabin. The next morning, he packed a small bag, flashlight, food, compass, and Ruth's herbs, and set off. The journey was harsh. Snow fell harder the closer he got. Trees groaned with weight and age. The path was overgrown, and no animal tracks marked the trail. The silence deepened. At dusk, he reached the entrance to the mine. Rusted rails vanished into the blackness of the tunnel. Above it, barely visible in the fading light, someone had carved the same circle symbol, a hollow sun eye, into the stone. He stepped inside. The air was heavy, still, as though untouched for generations. His flashlight flickered, though the batteries were new. Then, from deeper within the shaft, came the voice again. Down here. As he descended, the air grew colder, and the whispers more insistent. He saw shadows moving against the walls, hands pressing against old wooden beams, and faint, translucent figures walking beside him. Then he found it, a collapsed chamber sealed off by stone and time. But etched into the rock were hundreds of marks, the same symbol over and over again, some carved with trembling hands, others etched with nails or tools. In the center of the wall was a message, crudely written. They left us. We never got out. Tell them we're still here. The lights began again, not in the sky, but inside the tunnel. They spiraled gently around him, brushing his skin like wind, humming like breath. Eli fell to his knees, overwhelmed by grief not his own. Visions filled his mind, miners trapped beneath the earth, clawing at the walls, dying in the cold darkness. He understood then. They had been trying to speak for decades, not haunting reaching, hoping someone would listen. And now someone had. Welcome to the dark and tense story part 3. The ghosts of the hunters. The blizzard came down faster than they could have expected. At first, it was just the wind, a warning howl across the Alaskan tundra, echoing off the peaks. Then the snow started, thick and angry, obscuring the sun, swallowing the trail they had followed for miles. 5 hunters, grizzled and quiet, huddled beneath a cluster of snow-bent pines. Their guide, Tom Kinley, squinted through the whiteout and muttered, "We're gonna have to wait it out." The others agreed. These were seasoned men, not amateurs. They had tracked caribou and delved through worse. But something about this storm felt wrong. Too sudden, too strong. They built a quick shelter, just enough to break the wind, and wrapped themselves in fur and thick silence. By nightfall, the forest around them had become a white void, and the snow didn't stop. That's when the first strange thing happened. Andy, the youngest of the group, swore he saw someone. A figure standing just beyond the firelight. A man in old furs, rifle slung over his shoulder, face pale as frost. He didn't say anything. Andy whispered, shaking. He just looked at me, and then turned into the trees. The others brushed it off as snow blindness, nerves. But as the wind howled through the trees, they all began to feel it. They weren't alone. Tom stood up and called into the storm, "Hey, anyone out there? You all right?" No answer. That night, none of them slept. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply, even though the fire was strong. The snow began to fall upward, only briefly, just a moment, but long enough for all of them to see it. Then came the footprints, dozens of them, in a wide circle around their camp, fresh prints, leading in but never leading out. "Something's watching us," muttered Garrett, gripping his rifle tighter. In the morning, the storm was still raging. They couldn't find their bearings, their GPS dead, compasses spinning. So, they decided to move, stick together, and try to get to higher ground. But as they walked, the forest seemed to warp. Trees shifted, distances stretched. They passed the same crooked pine 3 times in under an hour. That's when they saw the second figure. This one was different. Closer. An older man with a thick beard, half frozen, eyes wide open but lifeless. He stood at the edge of the woods, rifle rusted, clothes from another time, perhaps the 50s, maybe earlier. He didn't move. He just watched them. Tom raised his voice. "Do you need help?" No answer. The man's head tilted slightly, then he vanished, not into the woods. He simply blinked out, like smoke and wind. They walked faster after that. Andy whispered, "I know who that was." The others looked at him. "I saw his picture at my grandfather's place. That was Thomas Lane. He disappeared on a hunting trip in '67. They never found him." The others didn't want to believe it, but they all felt it. This wasn't just wilderness. Something was pulling them into the past. Later that day, the trail finally opened into a small clearing, and in the center of it was an old campsite. A circle of stones, blackened by time, rusted cans, a torn tarp half buried in snow. Tom stepped forward and picked up a broken compass. There were carvings on one of the nearby trees, names. Faded but still there. J. Harper T. Lane C. Doyle. Those are the hunters from the 60s, Garrett whispered. The ones who went missing. No one ever found this camp. Suddenly, the wind stopped. Dead silence. Not even the sound of snow. Then came the voices. Low at first, like the crackle of old radio static. Then louder, more distinct. Help us. Still cold, still lost. We followed the wrong trail. The air shimmered, and the 5 men watched frozen, as ghostly figures emerged from the woods. Translucent shapes of hunters, weathered and worn, faces slack with sorrow. Some were missing gloves. Some had torn boots. One was limping, blood dripping from a phantom wound that never healed. They circled the living hunters, not threatening, just desperate. Are they trapped? Andy asked. Tom nodded slowly. I think this storm, this place, it's like a loop, a trap for the lost. One of the apparitions, the bearded man from before, stepped forward and reached out. His hand hovered over Tom's chest, then pointed east. There's a way out, Tom said, eyes wide. He's showing us. The spirits faded one by one, their eyes locked on the man, as if pleading. Remember us. The hunters followed the direction given. It wasn't easy, steep hills, deep snow. But within hours, the sky began to clear. And then, the tree line opened, revealing a ranger station in the distance. They stumbled inside, exhausted, and told the rangers what they'd seen. But the rangers didn't laugh. Instead, one of them quietly pulled out a black and white photo. 4 hunters, dated 1967, names written below. There in the center was the bearded man, Thomas Lane. Tom turned to the others. They weren't lost. They were waiting for someone to finish the journey they never could. Welcome to the dark and tense story part 4. Snowfall's soul awakening. They found the lodge by accident, hidden beneath a canopy of fir trees, shrouded by creeping moss and snow. The old structure sat in silence, forgotten by time, undisturbed for what looked like centuries. It wasn't on any map. Their guide, a local named Devin, had never even heard of it. This wasn't here last time, he said, eyebrows drawn tight. I swear it. The group, 5 hikers from Seattle, had come to Alaska for the thrill of raw nature. Mountains, wildlife, isolation. They weren't expecting to find a lodge made of birchwood and elkite, standing silently like a monument to something ancient. The architecture was unmistakably native, Inupiat or Tlingit, though none of them could be sure. Symbols were etched into the support beams, concentric circles, animals, and what looked like faces, some joyful, others howling in agony. Still, curiosity outweighed caution. It's shelter, Amanda said, brushing snow off her shoulders. Let's check it out before the snow hits. Inside, the air was still. No wind, no sounds, just the thick scent of cedar and something smoky. The single room was wide, the walls decorated with furs and faded drawings. At the center was a large ceremonial drum, cracked with age but still standing tall on carved wooden legs. Devin was the first to speak. We shouldn't be here. Why not? Mark said, shining his flashlight along the walls. It's just an abandoned lodge. Devin didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the drum. That night, they made camp beside the lodge. No tents, just sleeping bags near the fire. It was quiet, eerily so. A kind of silence that felt deliberate. They tried to sleep. Then, around midnight, the drum began to beat. 3 slow, deliberate thuds. They all woke at once. The drum was inside the lodge. No one had touched it. Amanda whispered, "Is that wind?" No, there was no wind. No footprints. The drum beat again. This time faster, 5 steady strikes. Mark stood up, trembling. "I'm going in." "Don't," Devin said sharply. "That drum is sacred. It's not ours to touch." Mark didn't listen. He stormed into the lodge, muttering about squirrels and loose branches. He didn't come out for 10 minutes. When he finally did, his face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "There was something in there," he said. "Something watching me." not an animal. Devin took him aside and said quietly, "That drum is meant to summon the spirits of the forest, the guardians. If it was beating, something was awakened." Amanda rolled her eyes. "This is just local superstition. Spirits don't exist." But that night, the snow began to fall unnaturally, sideways in spirals, then straight up into the sky. The fire wouldn't light again. Every match went out. Every lighter failed. And then they began hearing whispers. At first, just on the edge of hearing. Words in a language none of them understood. Then, clear as day, "Leave. The forest remembers." Devin grabbed his pack. "We're leaving at first light." But when dawn came, the path was gone. Where once there had been a trail back to the river, now there were only trees, dense, towering, and unfamiliar. Worse still, footprints circled the camp, dozens of them barefoot, leading from the woods to their sleeping bags and back. Mark collapsed. He couldn't stop shaking. They were here. I saw one last night, standing over me, just watching. Devin looked at Amanda. "We disturbed something. We didn't ask permission." "What do we do?" she asked. "We make it right." He pulled out a small pouch from his coat, dried tobacco and sage. He stepped into the lodge, speaking softly in an old dialect he had learned from his grandfather. He offered the pouch to the drum, placed it at its base, then whispered a prayer. The drum thudded once softly, then silence. Outside, the wind died. The snow stopped, but it wasn't over. That night, Amanda dreamed of fire, an ancient village burning, warriors crying out, women weeping. A drumbeat echoed over it all. She woke up screaming, face wet with tears. "I saw them," she said, "the people who built the lodge. They were attacked by men with rifles. The forest burned. That's what they remember." Devin nodded. "The spirits aren't angry. They're grieving." The next morning, they hiked north. The path slowly began to reappear. After hours of walking, they turned back for one last look. The lodge was gone. No footprints. No drum. Nothing. They returned to Seattle weeks later. Mark never spoke about it again. Amanda started volunteering at a Native History Museum. Devin began organizing forest cleanups, quietly placing sage and tobacco at the edge of every trail. None of them forgot the lodge, or the guardians who had waited so long to be heard. Welcome to the dark and tense story, Part 5. The Cursed Melody. The road to nowhere stretched into silence. Miles of frozen landscape rolled out before Thomas as his snowmobile crunched across the untouched terrain. Alaska in winter had always fascinated him. Untamed, beautiful, and deeply lonely. But he wasn't a tourist. He was on assignment, documenting abandoned settlements for a historical photography series. That's when he found the village. It wasn't on his map. The last recorded town in that region had been evacuated in the 1950s due to a devastating avalanche. But there it stood, half a dozen wooden cabins, roofs weighed heavy with snow, and a church steeple piercing the gray sky like a dagger. He should have turned back, but curiosity gnawed at him. He parked the snowmobile and walked in, camera in hand. The village was silent, swallowed in a strange, oppressive stillness. The air smelled of pine, decay, and something faintly metallic, like rusted instruments. Then he heard it. A piano. Soft, broken notes, echoing through the air, seemingly from the old church at the far end of the village. He froze. There was no power here, no signs of life, and yet the music, slow, melancholic, called to him like a memory just beyond reach. Drawn like a moth, he pushed open the creaking doors of the church. Dust choked the pews. Candles long melted, but there in the center of the room stood an old upright piano, its wood warped with time. Ivory keys yellowed like old teeth. The melody stopped the moment he stepped inside. No one was there, but the room was warm, as if someone had just been present. He approached the piano. A single sheet of music lay open on the stand, handwritten, faded with age. Its title was in Russian, but one word stood out in English, scrawled in the corner. Listen only once. Thomas, of course, ignored the warning. He hit record on his phone and pressed play on the tape deck built into the piano, strangely intact, covered in frost. The music began to play again. A haunting melody, slow, deliberate, like a waltz being performed underwater. It wasn't discordant, but it wasn't quite right either. Notes bent strangely, as though being stretched. He listened, and then something shifted. The light dimmed, though the sky outside had not changed. A sound echoed through the church, footsteps on the ceiling. Not mice, not wind, boots, heavy, deliberate. He shut off the tape. Everything stopped. He stumbled back outside, breath clouding the air. That night, he set up camp nearby, but sleep did not come easy. He kept waking to faint noises, the dragging of something across wood, or the hiss of whispers just outside his tent. When he looked, nothing was there. The next day, he returned to the village to take more photos, but every image on his camera was corrupted. Distorted faces appeared in windows, blurred hands reaching from trees, and that melody, he couldn't stop humming it. Back at his cabin that night, far from the village, he played back the recording. It sounded different now, more intense, the tempo slightly faster, and beneath the piano, a whisper, layered and looping. He enhanced the audio on his laptop. The whisper grew louder, clearer. It was a voice, repeating a phrase in Russian. He ran it through a translation app. Do not listen again. Thomas, shaken, deleted the file, or tried to. Every time he erased it, it came back, renamed, resaved, sometimes playing automatically when he wasn't near the laptop. Then the accident started. First, he slipped on his porch and fractured a rib. The next night, his generator caught fire. His water froze. And always the music. Sometimes playing from nowhere, sometimes inside his head. He contacted a linguist online and sent them a screenshot of the handwritten sheet music. Hours later, the linguist replied with a single line. Where did you find this? That piece is cursed. It was banned by the Soviet Union in 1948 after reports of mass hysteria and suicide among orchestras that played it. Thomas stopped responding. That night, the power in his cabin died completely. He tried burning the original paper copy he'd brought with him. It wouldn't catch fire. It was as if it rejected destruction. The piano melody played again. Only now, it wasn't in his head. It came from outside, in the snow. He stepped out with a flashlight and saw them, silhouettes, standing between the trees, frozen in place, dozens of them, dressed in coats from another century, faces hidden by shadows, all facing the cabin. The music played louder. He dropped the flashlight and ran back inside, doors locked, curtains drawn. He huddled under blankets, hands over ears, but the music went on and on, every note sharper than the last, like blades along his skull. By morning, the figures were gone, but the snow around the cabin was trampled as if they had danced. He fled that day, abandoned his equipment, drove all the way to Anchorage, slept in his car, refused to go near a piano, but the song followed him, in hotel lobbies, on a child's toy keyboard, even in elevator chimes. Always the same twisted melody. He tried recording it again, just once, for proof. His phone burst into flames. Now Thomas lives alone, far from music. No radio, no internet, no phone. But even in the silence, he hears it. That song, growing louder. Welcome to the dark and tense story, part 6. Soul of the Orphan Wolves. Alaska's winters are unforgiving, not just in weather, but in silence. That kind of silence that creeps under your skin and makes you feel like you're being watched, even when you're alone. For the villagers of Irix Hollow, an isolated settlement carved into the woods near the Kayakuk River, that silence was broken by howls. Not one, not two, but dozens. It began in December. Animals started disappearing. Then came the reports. Sled dogs found mauled, their pens shattered like matchsticks. Livestock torn apart, not eaten, just slaughtered. The villagers blamed a pack of rogue wolves, driven mad by hunger or rabies. But something didn't fit. They didn't just kill. They destroyed. Doors ripped off hinges. Windows shattered. Claw marks, longer than any natural predator should have made, scratched into walls like warnings. Then came the first death. Old Henry Caskin, a trapper, was found in his cabin. The door still locked from the inside. No broken windows. And yet his body was mangled, clawed as if attacked by wild animals. And in the snow outside, a single trail of wolf prints. No prints going in, none coming out. The village elders held a meeting. They called in Cal Boone, a wildlife ranger who had spent years tracking wolves across Alaska. Cal arrived skeptical, armed with rifles, cameras, and cold logic. He set up traps, motion sensors. He told the villagers not to panic. But then he heard them. That first night, the howling started again. Louder, closer. Cal climbed the observation tower near the edge of the forest. Through his night vision scope, he spotted them. A pack of massive, pale wolves, larger than any he had seen before. They circled just beyond the tree line. But something was wrong. Their eyes didn't reflect light. They glowed. Not amber, not green, but white, like fog caught in headlights. And they didn't move like wolves. They stood too still, too symmetrical, almost human in posture. Cal didn't sleep. The next day, he followed the tracks leading into the woods. They didn't behave like normal trails. They weaved in perfect patterns, almost as if forming symbols. Strange loops, intersecting spirals. No animal moved like that, not by instinct. At the center of the tracks, he found a clearing, and in it, remnants of an old hunting camp. Burnt fire pits, rusted rifles, bones, human bones. Cal brought back what he could. The village doctor confirmed it. Remains of at least 4 men. All appeared to have died from exposure, but something about the bones was off. They were gnawed at by something with teeth much too sharp and too long. That night, Cal asked the elders about the hunting camp. The room went quiet. Finally, one old man spoke, Miko, the last surviving member of the original settlers. He told a story that the younger generations had dismissed as myth. Years ago, in the early 1900s, a group of hunters had gone deep into the forest during a brutal winter. Desperate for food, they found a den of wolves and killed them all, including the pups. But they didn't just kill, they tortured. They posed with the bodies, left them strung in trees as trophies. Only one pup survived, hidden under the snow. Miko's grandfather said that after that winter, the hunters never returned. Some were found frozen, faces contorted in terror. Others were simply gone. And that year, the howling began. Each winter since, the wolves would come. They're not beasts, Miko whispered. They're vengeance. Cal didn't believe in ghost stories, but something primal inside him did. He saw the fear in their eyes, the way the villagers spoke the word wolves, as if it might summon them. He checked his traps the next morning. All sprung, all empty, except one. Inside, not a wolf, but a scrap of fur, woven into a braid like human hair, tied with sinew. That night, the wolves returned. This time, they attacked the town. They moved like shadows, slipping between buildings without making a sound. Cal tried to shoot one. The bullet passed through it like smoke, and still it stared at him with those pale, lifeless eyes. Screams echoed. Doors were torn apart from the inside. One woman claimed she saw a wolf walk upright, dragging her husband into the woods. When she chased it, she found only claw marks on the trees, and her husband's boots nailed to a trunk. Cal realized something then. These weren't creatures of flesh. They were spirits, bound to the forest, to vengeance. They could not be killed, but maybe they could be understood. He returned to the old hunting camp. There, he found the den, collapsed and overgrown. In the center lay bones, tiny, delicate. He built a cairn, marked it with a wooden carving of a wolf. He lit a fire and read aloud an apology, shaky but sincere. He didn't know if it would work. He just knew it felt right. The howling that night was different, softer, sadder. The attack stopped, but the villagers never forgot. Every winter, they still hear the howling. Not threatening, just a reminder, a warning. Some say they see shapes moving in the snow. White figures watching from a distance, never coming too close. They call them the orphaned wolves. And they say if you ever find yourself deep in the Alaskan woods, and you hear a song of sorrow riding the wind, don't run. Listen. Apologize. Remember. because not all wolves are born. Some are made. Welcome to the dark and tense story part 7, Ghost on the Lake. They called it Stillwater Lake, though that name was a lie. The water wasn't still. Not really. Not if you knew what to look for. In the heart of Alaska, buried deep in a valley surrounded by snow-dusted pine and jagged peaks, Stillwater Lake sat like a forgotten mirror, its surface smooth, dark, and glassy, even in the dead of winter. The locals, few and aging, rarely spoke of it. When they did, it was always in hushed tones and with quick glances over their shoulders. And no one, absolutely no one, went boating after dark. It had happened years ago, long before people stopped believing in the old stories. A man named Riley Stroud owned a small fishing lodge near the lake. He was a practical man, used to the cold and the silence. One winter, when the snow hit late and the ice was slow to form, he and 3 others, his cousin Dave, a tourist named Margot, and a quiet mechanic from Juneau, decided to take the boat out for one last ride before everything froze over. They never returned. No radio calls, no footprints on the shore, no floating wreckage. Just gone. 2 days later, the boat washed up on the northern bank, half submerged and covered in a fine layer of frost, even though the night hadn't dropped below freezing. Their gear was still on board, but not a single person. That's when the whispers started. At first, people blamed the water, currents, sinkholes, maybe even thin ice. But that didn't explain the sounds. At night, when the wind calmed and the lake turned quiet, you could hear them. A creak of oars, a distant splash. Sometimes even laughter, low, muffled, as though coming from beneath the water. One man swore he saw lights bobbing near the center of the lake, where the water was deepest. Another claimed he heard Riley calling his name from the shoreline, even though Riley had been missing for nearly a decade. That winter, people stopped fishing, but not all. One night, a new couple, tourists from Oregon, set out to prove the legend wrong. Locals warned them, begged them not to go, but they laughed it off, thinking it was just small-town superstition. Their kayak was found the next morning, half frozen and covered in scratches on the inside. Still no bodies. I arrived in Stillwater during a research project on vanishing settlements. The village barely had a dozen residents, and all of them seemed to share the same wary glance when I mentioned the lake. I wasn't there for ghost stories, but after 3 separate people whispered, "Don't go near the water after sunset," I grew curious. That night, I stood at the shoreline with a recorder in hand. Nothing. Then, just after midnight, the lake began to ripple, not from wind or falling snow, but from something unseen, gliding silently across the surface. I raised the recorder. At first, I heard only the soft lap of water. Then came a voice, distant, hoarse, "Help us." I froze. The water stilled again. Back at the lodge, I played the recording 10 times. And each time, I heard it clearer. Multiple voices, some whispering, some calling out names, and one, unmistakably, repeating the words, "We're still here. We never left." The locals told me the legend. They say the lake was sacred long before settlers arrived, a mirror for lost spirits. The indigenous people never fished there. They never even stepped foot near its edge after dusk. They believed the lake was a place of crossing, where the veil between the living and dead thinned like the ice each winter. Riley and the others, they said, never drowned. They were taken. The boats, those that dared to return, were mere vessels. The passengers had become something else. They became echoes. One woman, Elsa Muir, a teacher who'd lived there 40 years, claimed her brother had gone missing on the lake as a teen. Some nights, she told me, I still hear his voice outside my window. He hums our childhood song. I asked why she didn't move away. She looked at me, eyes hollow. Because he follows. On my final night in Stillwater, I did something foolish. I took a boat. Just a rowboat, nothing fancy. I wanted proof. I wanted to hear the voices again. Maybe see the lights. Maybe understand. The lake was unnaturally calm. No stars. No moon. Just the heavy black sky pressing down like a lid. As I reached the center, the silence changed. Not louder, but deeper. Like sound had been pulled away. Then a knock on the hull. Then another. Then a whisper, inches from my ear, though no one was near me. Go back. I turned around. Another boat floated in the distance. Old, weather-worn, covered in frost. 3 figures sat inside, perfectly still. One raised a hand and waved. My flashlight flickered. I rowed back faster than I've ever moved in my life. When I turned to look again, the second boat had vanished, but the water beneath me glowed faintly, pale blue and green, like the northern lights had sunk beneath the surface. I left Stillwater the next morning, but even now back home, I sometimes dream of the lake, of oars cutting through glassy black water, of voices trapped in frost, of faces beneath the ice, watching, waiting, reaching. And sometimes, when I wake, I swear I can still hear the creaking of wood, far away, as if a boat is approaching. But there's no water near my house, just silence, and that silence is never still. Welcome to the dark and 10th-story party. The cursed village. They say no maps show it anymore. Nestled in the shadow of the Alaskan range, past winding, snow-laden trails and forgotten railroad lines, lies the village of Kalvik, or what remains of it. Even the name has faded from government records. But the curse, that remains very much alive. The village had once been a thriving outpost, founded in the late 1800s by fur traders and missionaries. It was built on native land, though the stories go deeper. Something about a burial ground, or a sacred site desecrated when the first chapel was erected. In the winter of 1894, an entire census of 37 residents vanished overnight. No struggle, no signs of departure. Fires still burned in hearths, meals left cold on tables. Only a single set of bloody footprints leading out of the church and into the woods. Since then, Kalvik has been abandoned, at least in theory. I first heard about it from a man named Paulie, a trapper I met in Fairbanks. He was drunk, half-frozen, and missing 3 fingers, but he spoke of Kalvik with utter seriousness. They're still there, he whispered, the ones that never left. When I asked who, he only replied, the taken, the ones bound to the snow. Against better judgment, I searched for Kalvik. Weeks of research turned up next to nothing, until I found a single line in an archived newspaper. Missionary efforts ceased after the second winter. Kalvik lost to storms, or worse. It took me another 2 weeks to locate the area on an old geological survey map, mislabeled, overgrown, almost erased. But I found it. The hike was brutal. I arrived near sundown, the temperature plummeting. Snowflakes spun through the wind like whispers, hissing as they brushed my coat. But there it was, a hollow ring of cabins, collapsed roofs, rotted beams, and in the center, a stone chapel leaning like a dying man. The village was real. I pitched my tent just beyond the ruins, careful not to step into the central square. Paulie's voice echoed in my mind. Never stand in the circle after dark. That night, I lit no fire. I recorded notes, observed the silence, until it broke. It began with a bell, a low, distant clang, then another, but there was no bell tower left, just the broken steeple and its rusted beams. Then came the footsteps, crunching slowly through snow, not towards me, around me, circling. I turned off my recorder, listened. Then, from the woods, a voice. Leave before the ground remembers you. I froze. A shadow passed between the trees. Slender, barefoot, gone in an instant. By morning, the footprints were gone. No wind strong enough to wipe them clean had passed through the forest that night, and yet no trace remained. Inside the chapel, things were worse. The pews had been shredded. Not worn, torn, like something clawed its way out of them. Scratches lined the altar. Ash covered the floor, even though no fire had touched the building in decades. And carved deep into the pulpit, in both English and Inupiat script, were the words, "They speak through the snow." Back at camp, I reviewed the audio I captured. Most was useless, wind and static. But then I heard it, a child's voice, faint but distinct, whispering a name I didn't recognize. Anaru. I played it again, and again. Each time, it sounded clearer, until finally another voice, deeper, joined it. You shouldn't have come. That night, I dreamt I was in the center of the village. The chapel stood whole again, firelight glowing from its windows. People stood in the square, motionless. All turned toward me. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths opened, and in perfect unison they said, "Join us." I woke to find snow had buried my tent door completely. My watch had stopped. My batteries were dead. My compass spun wildly. I was no longer alone. I tried to leave the next day. No trail, no landmarks. Everything had shifted. The forest itself had closed in. It felt tighter. Wrong. Worse still, I began seeing them in daylight. Figures far in the tree line, watching, always facing me, never moving. Not a sound, not a breath. And when I blinked, they were gone. I ran. Hours passed, or maybe days, until I returned to Kalvik, standing in the same spot I had the first night. I hadn't left. Inside the chapel, I found something I hadn't seen before. A journal, half buried beneath the floorboards, dated 1894. The last page read, "The snow speaks. It tells us we must stay. We tried to resist, but the wind carries their voices now. We built on cursed ground. The spirits of the forest remember. They want us, not our prayers." That night, I stopped resisting. I walked into the square. The air grew warmer. Shadows gathered, circling slowly. And then, from all around me, voices, hundreds of them, whispering memories, confessions, secrets of those long gone. I felt them press against my skin like frost. Then silence. I don't remember leaving. I woke up 3 days later on the edge of a snowbank, 20 miles from Kalvik. My pack was with me. My audio recorder, though drained, had one final message recorded, though I never hit record. It said in my own voice, "We are the snow now. We wait in the silence." To this day, I don't remember saying it, but every winter, when snow starts to fall and the wind carries just right, I hear them again, calling, welcoming, and I know someday I'll return, and this time, I won't leave. Welcome to the dark and tense story part 9, The Sinister Doctor. Deep in the Alaskan wilderness, far from roads, phone signals, or even consistent daylight, sits the remote village of Nivituk, a place shrouded in fog and folklore. Only a few dozen souls remain there, living in wooden cabins held together by rusted nails and old prayers. Tourists never pass through. Locals rarely leave. But if you ask around Fairbanks, Nome, or even Anchorage, you'll eventually hear his name whispered in cold taverns or beside crackling fires. Dr. Calder, a doctor who isn't listed in any registry, a healer who lives in shadows, a man whose patients walk out of his care looking healthier, stronger, and somehow not quite the same. The first time I heard of him was from an old trapper named Marta. She had deep scars along her neck and eyes that never blinked long. She spoke of a friend, a woman named Elka, who had wandered too far into the snow and returned delirious, screaming of voices that fed on breath. Doctors in the city could find no illness. She grew worse, eyes hollowing, skin paling, lungs crackling like thin ice. One night, Marta said, an old man appeared at Elka's door. Long black coat, leather bag, no footprints behind him. He introduced himself as Dr. Calder and claimed he could remove what was unnatural. She let him in. By morning, Elka was healed. No fever, no cough, no fear. Just a serene smile and a strange slowness in how she moved. Like each step was calculated, each blink rehearsed. She began working at the local clinic, assisting other patients. And one by one, more people claimed to have seen Dr. Calder, though none ever called him. He came when he was needed, and always at night. After each visit, another patient would recover from an unexplainable affliction, and within days, they would begin to change. Their eyes became too still. Their voices dropped an octave. They began to dress like him. Dark coats, gloves regardless of weather, collars high against the neck. Eventually, they all left Nivituk. Curious and skeptical, I traveled to the village during the late fall, when the days grew shorter and the northern lights danced like restless spirits overhead. It took a bush plane, a snowmobile, and a full day's hike. The locals didn't welcome me. But they didn't send me away, either. One man, Elias, finally spoke to me in hushed tones. They say Dr. Calder was once a battlefield surgeon. He began, but not in any war we know. He operated on the soul, not just flesh. I laughed. He didn't. He removes the sickness, yes, but it has to go somewhere. The turning point came 3 nights into my stay. A woman in the village, Marin, collapsed during a blizzard. Feverish, shaking, speaking in tongues no one recognized. Her husband begged for help, but no one called a doctor. They simply waited. And sure enough, as the snow thickened, a knock came at the door. I watched through the window. A tall man in a charcoal coat, black leather gloves, face pale as wax, eyes like glass marbles. He carried a bag that pulsed, as though something alive shifted inside. "Dr. Calder," someone whispered beside me. I didn't see who said it. He entered Marin's home. No one else followed. I waited outside, heart pounding, as soft murmurs leaked through the door. Some in English, some in a language I didn't recognize. At exactly 3:33 a.m., he exited, alone. Marin's husband stepped out behind him, tears streaking his cheeks. "She's healed," he said, and she was, at least on the surface. The fever vanished. Her skin glowed. Her smile returned, but her eyes were different. They didn't follow movement. They stared past people, as though looking into a world we couldn't see. The next night, she walked door to door, asking sick villagers if they needed the good doctor's attention. That's when I decided to confront him. I left a message, written on birch bark, left at the steps of the chapel where he was rumored to stay when passing through. It read, "I seek to understand, not to judge." At midnight, I received my reply, a knock at my cabin door. When I opened it, he stood there. Dr. Calder was taller than I expected. His voice was deep, patient, and unnervingly calm. "You have questions," he said. I nodded. "Come walk with me." We moved through the snow, away from the village, toward the frozen lake beyond the trees. He told me very little, just that he had learned how to separate afflictions from souls, draw them out like venom from a wound. "But the sickness, it doesn't die," I said. He turned to me, smiling faintly. "No, it must be stored." I realized then that his bag was not filled with tools, but with souls, bits of corruption, madness, despair, all removed and kept alive. "And your patients?" I asked. He looked back toward the village. They are no longer afflicted, but they are no longer only themselves. I tried to leave the next morning. The trail I came in on had vanished. My snowmobile had frozen over, its engine filled with something thick and black. My GPS spun wildly. I was trapped. And then Marin came to see me. "We understand now," she said. "We were touched by darkness. He took it away. Now we serve." I asked what that meant. She smiled. "One day, you'll help him too." I locked my door that night, but I heard footsteps around my cabin, scraping, whispers in a dozen voices, overlapping in a harmony that made no sense, and yet chilled me to the bone. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up with a black coat draped over me, and a note, written in looping, antique handwriting. "You've seen too much. That means you've seen enough. When the time comes, you will walk with me." It was unsigned, but I knew. When I returned to civilization weeks later, friends said I had changed. My eyes seemed duller, my voice lower. I began wearing gloves all the time, even indoors. And sometimes, at night, I dream of the bag, the one that pulses, the one I now carry. Welcome to the dark and tense story, part 10. The ghosts of the shipwreck shore. They say the sea along the southeastern coast of Alaska has its own kind of silence. A silence that presses against your chest and whispers into your ears. Not with wind or waves, but with memory. Just off that coast, half buried in sand and time, lies the Ardent Gale, a massive iron-hulled steamship that ran aground during a storm over a century ago. No one ever salvaged it. No one dared. Fishermen say it appears and disappears with the fog, sometimes miles up or down the shoreline, as though the ocean itself can't decide where the wreck belongs. But those who stumble across it all report the same thing. The smell of salt and smoke, the sound of distant creaking timbers, and the feeling that someone is watching them from behind rusted portholes. I was a deckhand on a commercial crabbing vessel called the Northern Warden. We docked in a small harbor near Cordova, waiting out a storm. One of the old locals, gray-bearded and weathered, warned us over whiskey shots. If the fog rolls in from the east, don't beach your boat. Don't even anchor near land. The ardent gale calls when she's hungry. We laughed. We didn't listen. On the third day, the storm eased, and we headed back out. But as we rounded a headland near Prince William Sound, the fog rolled in so fast, and thick it swallowed everything. Our instruments blinked erratically. GPS dead, radar full of static. Then we saw it. The ardent gale. She wasn't on our charts. She wasn't supposed to be here. But there she sat, tilted on her starboard side, her smokestack leaning like a broken finger, hull encrusted with salt and barnacles. We got closer, too close, and saw a narrow stretch of shoreline. Curious and reckless, our captain decided to drop anchor. "Let's stretch our legs," he said. 5 of us climbed into the skiff and rowed to shore. As we approached the derelict ship, the world grew quiet. Not silent, quiet, like a breath held too long. No gulls, no surf, just the ship and the fog. The ardent gale towered above us, rusted and skeletal. Chains dangled like vines. Her name was still visible in flaking gold paint, and the carved figurehead of a woman, once graceful, was now cracked down the middle, her eyes gouged out. The hull had a large tear near the stern, just big enough to climb inside. So we did. Inside, the air was thick with rot and rust. The metal groaned beneath our feet, as if waking up. Lanterns long since broken still hung from hooks, and remnants of life, molded journals, shattered teacups, decayed uniforms, lay strewn across the floor. It was like the crew had simply vanished. But then we heard it. Footsteps. Above us. At first we thought it might be the tide shifting metal, but the steps were slow, deliberate. I called out, "Hello." Silence. Then came a whisper. Not in my ears, in my mind. A voice like seawater boiling. "We never made it home, and neither will you." We split up. Stupid, I know. Each of us drawn by the odd sensation of familiarity, as if parts of the ship remembered us, knew us. I wandered into the captain's quarters. The desk still had a logbook open. The last entry read, "They've stopped dying, but they haven't stopped moving." I looked up and saw a mirror, but my reflection, it wasn't me. It was wearing an old naval uniform, face sunken, lips blue, eyes wide open and weeping salt water. Then the mirror cracked. From somewhere deep in the ship, one of our crew, Tomas, screamed. We ran toward the sound, found him standing in the galley, arms covered in cuts, self-inflicted. He claimed, though he didn't remember how. He kept muttering. I saw them. I saw their dinner still warm. They're waiting. Then another sound. Creaking. Below deck. We followed it into the hold, and that's where we saw them. Figures in tattered uniforms, half-transparent, swaying as though still caught in the tide. Their eyes glowed a dull green, and some had ropes around their necks, others gaping holes in their chests. But they weren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They were trapped. Trapped in the moment of death, forever looping their final tasks, manning stations, writing letters, wiping non-existent blood from their hands. And the worst part, they turned and looked at us, not as strangers, but as replacements. One by one, we tried to flee. One crewmate, Joel, made it out first, but as soon as he stepped onto the sand, he froze. His eyes rolled back, and he dropped to the ground. When we reached him, he was still breathing, but his face had changed. Older, weathered, like he'd lived 100 years in seconds. He never spoke again. The rest of us made it back to the skiff, dragging Joel with us. But the fog had thickened, and we couldn't find the Northern Warden. The sea was wrong, flat, still. It was as if the world had shrunk, and the ardent gale was all that remained. Then I noticed something horrible. The skiff, it was slowly drifting back toward the shore, toward the wreck, toward them, and they were waiting. I don't remember how we escaped, only that I awoke days later in hospital in Juneau. They said a fishing boat found us, myself and Joel, floating near a buoy, unconscious, our skiff half submerged. The others were never found. Sometimes, when I sleep, I hear creaking metal. Sometimes, in the mirror, I still see that version of myself, the one in the uniform, waiting on the ardent gale. Because she's not just a ship. She's a harbor for the lost. And once you've seen her, once you've heard the crew whisper your name, you're never truly free. Thank you for watching the whole video. If you find it interesting, please give me a subscription and a comment.